From director Arkasha Stevenson comes The First Omen, a prequel to, well, technically The First Omen because they made a bunch more, but a prequel to 1976's The Omen. Now, going into this, I wondered, somebody said something about a twist, and I wondered, are they going to have Liev Schreiber show up at the end of this film and reprise his character from the Omen remake? Because in case you forgot, which most people always do with remakes, they did remake The Omen in the early 2000s, but they don't. This is actually a prequel to the 1976 Richard Donner The Omen, starring Lee Remick and Gregory Peck. And like most prequels, I feel like it was pointless. So I don't think it's poorly made. Here's the deal. I made the mistake of going to the movies and seeing a nunsploitation Devil Made Me Do It double feature, because currently in theaters as I record this is a film called Immaculate and a film called The First Omen. And unfortunately, they're both basically the exact same story with minor differences. So we saw Immaculate first, which we really liked, see that review separately, and we saw The First Omen second. And it's going to suffer. I would not recommend doing that double feature. In theory, it's a great double feature for a drive-in to do, but giving you the same movie twice, an hour later, watching almost the same story, it's going to suffer. So keep in mind that whatever I say about The First Omen, it did suffer from me having seen essentially the same movie an hour earlier. So The First Omen stars Nell Tiger Free as an American, she's a British actress, but as an American who travels to a convent or whatever it is, in Rome. And Bill Nighy is somebody she had worked with or known as a youth, and he is sort of a higher up at this church, and she's there to do churchy and nunny things. This takes place in 1971, I should say, and it does a pretty decent job at recreating the era, though there's a couple moments where I'm like, hate to be a stickler, but that music is from later, and that look, those clothes really would be from a bit later than 1971. Some of them might actually be from a bit later than 1976. But that aside, it has a great look. It's shot in Rome. It feels like Rome of the 70s, which is a time and place I really am a fan of. Films of that era, I'm a fan of. And the score is pretty good in this. And overall, the performances are pretty good in this. But Charles Dance is in this briefly. And it does tie into the original Omen. There is a character, the character of, what's his name, if I can find him here, the character of Father Brennan, who was in Patrick Troutman, I believe. Troutman played him in the original Omen. That character is here. He is someone who's trying to find out something untoward is going on, something not right is going on at this convent, something not right is going on with these nuns, and he's trying to avert something bad happening that he doesn't quite know yet. And as an audience, we already know because this is a prequel. And that's the problem with prequels. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes you can get a good prequel. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is technically a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it doesn't matter because it's just another adventure in that character's life. But if you're trying to stop some major thing happening, which in this film, I hate to give anything away, but I mean, if you know, well, I won't give anything away, but if you know what The Omen was about, this film is leading up to the events of The Omen. So if ever you're watching a prequel, unless you're watching this movie blind, like if you just go to see The First Omen and you've never seen any Omen movies, this movie may actually work quite well for you. But if you know and love the original Omen like I do, it's just like, well, of course they're not going to thwart what is going to happen at the end of this movie because it has to happen in order to make the movies that come after it. I always say that prequels are like the most cowardly, contained way to make another film in a series because there's no risk. Like, the only characters who are in jeopardy are going to be the ones that are new in this film. Any character that leads to the next one, and it has to go in a certain way. It's just like, I don't know. I'm not a fan of prequels in general. This film is very gory at times, very gruesome at times. Be aware of that if you're looking for that in a horror movie. But it does the stuff I don't like about modern horror films. It does the jump scares. It does the person acting real twitchy with quick cuts and all that. All the stuff that's supposed to be scary that has been handed down as this is what is scary to an audience, it's just lame to me most of the time and silly more often than not. It nails the atmosphere for the most part. Its production quality is certainly there. It's 20th Century Fox. They had a budget with this. Shockingly, I've heard firsthand that 35 millimeter prints have been struck of this film. So if you're a fan of film, seeing movies on film, if you're lucky enough to have a theater near you that can show 35 millimeter film, you may be seeing this on film. I know the Somerville Theater in Boston, where I was recently, I was shocked. That's where I found out. He said, oh yeah, we've got First Omen on 35. I'm like, I didn't think they did that for mainstream horror stuff. I always thought it was more of a niche, art house, certain director kind of thing, but you can see it that way if you want. I didn't really care for it, ultimately. Ultimately, I thought it was kind of a waste. I got bored at some point. I kind of tuned out at one point. This is roughly about 2 hours, I think. And at some point, I was just like, yeah, I know where this is going, and it's just can wrap up. Now, it does have a twist toward the end. It does have arguably one ending too many. Arguably maybe a couple endings too many. But the extra bit at the end exists solely to set up at least 2 more movies. You know how Hollywood is. It's got to be a trilogy. Everything's got to be a trilogy. Can't take it seriously unless there's 3 of them. So the end of this film really kind of sets up, if this film makes enough money, that there will be at least 1 more film, and it tells you kind of where this film is going to go. It may be setting up a series to run parallel to the original Exorcist films. It does what I thought the J.J. Abrams' Star Trek film did brilliantly. The one with Chris Pine and everybody, Zachary Quinto and Zoe Saldana. That film did a thing where it said, okay, parallel universe. These are the same characters you know and love from the original Star Trek TV series and films, but they're on a different course now. We have clearly said this is its own thing, and it can do anything, and the rules of the old Star Treks don't apply anymore. And I thought that was brilliant. And when they did that, I was like, perfect. Go wherever you want with these. I'll be entertained. And I was entertained by all those. The first Omen, and if at any point, by the way, I've said first Exorcist in this film, I meant the first Omen. The first Omen does that. I'm not going to say brilliantly, but it does that so they can make their own series of films and not be too concerned with the other Omen films. They have to play by a certain set of rules, but not too much. So my guess is that we're going to see 2 more of these films set a few years apart. You know, one will probably be 5 or 10 years after this one, so you'll get one in the 80s, and one might be even later than that. So they'll probably do like X-Men First Class did, was to try to hit all of the hip decades for people who are nostalgic and do it that way. So we'll see. I don't know how well this film is doing. As again, I think it was okay. If you're a fan of horror movies in general, if you're a fan of like religious-based horror movies in general, you may be totally cool with this film. There are things that are inaccuracies I've read in terms of the original Exorcist. What the original Exorcist says was things that, what the original, I keep saying Exorcist. I always had these two like intertwined, Omen and Exorcist in my head. What the original, again, if I said Exorcist at any point during this review, I meant the Omen. What the original Omen says happened before the events of the original Omen, some of that doesn't quite jibe with this film. At any rate, I'm sure most of the people watching this are not hardcore fans, I almost said Exorcist again, of the original Omen. They're probably younger, everything's aimed at people who are younger, so that's cool, whatever. I just didn't think it was that great. So I thought it was a little dull, and ultimately I didn't care. But I give it points for having it being set. You know, again, for all I knew, they were going to try to start a fresh new series and set this in a contemporary time, or set this as a prequel to the remake, but probably not the remake because most people don't really think about that one anymore. So I was happy that it was set in the early 70s in Italy, a time period I like, and that some of the music was from that period, and I love that. And your mileage may vary, but in theaters now, the first Omen.